Welcome to the Biltmore Church Podcast. Our church exists to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus who reach up, reach in, and reach out. And this podcast is a resource that's hopefully going to help you do just that. We're in week 5 of our Ask Me Anything teaching series, where we've been diving into some of the biggest and toughest questions of the faith. Questions maybe you've been asking and wrestling with, maybe questions that the culture is asking the church, and we've been looking at God's Word together over the last 5 weeks and looking for some answers out of Scripture. And then here on the podcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're covering even more of your questions. You submitted so many leading up to the new series. We wanted to try to get to as many of them as we can and to tackle as many of them as we can. Quick introductions today. My name is Christian Cooper. I serve as the online campus pastor here, and I'm here today with our lead pastor, Bruce Frank. Also with Kurt McClure, who is our Waynesville campus pastor. We're going to talk about Waynesville here in just a second. I'm really excited to jump on with both you guys
today.
There we
go. Absolutely. Kurt McClure, People's Choice Award winner.
Already the mayor of Haywood County, maybe, or whatever whatever the title is for that.
I like that title. Eminent Archon.
Yeah. So let's just, before we get into our discussion today, I want to just kind of kick it over and say Waynesville is on the horizon. We're so excited to be launching a new campus out there. Maybe just for both of you to jump in, any updates we can share, ways we can get involved, ways to get connected. Whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, well, let me jump in. Kind of the 60-second review of this thing is one of the few blessings that came out of COVID was we noticed on a heat map of people watching online during especially the early days were from Haywood County. We already knew there was I think 600 or 700 people kind of in the database that have come to various things, but to have people have hundreds of unique URLs. We don't know if that's 1 or 5,
right? But
watching from Haywood County, and particularly centered around Waynesville, was super encouraging. So we kind of started to try to dig into that a little bit. Long story short, God led us to Waynesville. It took us a little bit longer to find the exact location, but we should have a cool announcement in we'll probably announce it. I can't imagine it being any later than the first weekend of December, but it's all looking good and good weeks ahead, I think, in announcing some stuff about Waynesville.
That's coming up quick.
And by the way, one of them, we all think our campus pastors, they fit great in their particular locations, and we do. I think we got a phenomenal, I think probably the best unit of campus pastors, team of campus pastors we ever had. But I mean, Kurt, I knew Kurt when he was chairman of the deacons back 13 years ago, or something like that. And it's always been great to know him. It's also been cool to watch him develop as a person, as a follower of Christ. Then he jumped on staff. What was your first staff position? I can't remember.
Pastoral Care and Outreach Associate.
Okay, I don't even know what that is, but
it was everything.
It was whatever needs to be done. But it was awesome. Just a servant at heart, and loves people. You're a great soul winner. And then we watched him, and then he eventually got into missions and has done and it's just a perfect fit. I think God gave us a perfect fit for helping out in Waynesville, and in particular in Haywood County, and is from there. So again, he has already made tons of friends and had tons of friends. So can't wait to get you a facility. Just taking a little longer than we thought.
Yeah, it's real exciting. Just to little fun fact, about 20 years ago when I worked for Coca-Cola, my first route was in Waynesville, Maggie Valley, Eagles Nest, all around that area in Canton. So it's cool to circle back up and go back to where some things started, even from the corporate world now to even into ministry. And I know a lot of people are asking questions, how can you get connected?
Yeah.
The easiest way is to text Waynesville to 28282.
You guessed it.
Just like we do everything.
Yep. Yeah.
And when you do that, it will bring you to the location of everything you need, from Facebook page to easy way to email me and the team. But we're excited about the days ahead. Connect groups. We already have a few connect groups going in Haywood County. So if you're interested, reach out to us. And then in the new year, we will be launching 3, 4, 5 new adult connect groups as we start the path to open up as soon as we can, Pastor.
Starting construction. And by the way, and we look at a bunch of different criteria, characteristics that make great campus pastors. We've been multi-site, I guess, since 2012, so 11 years. So we've been learning, and what's a great fit. And Kurt meets all those, but one of the ones that's often overlooked is a campus pastor often at times has to make a bunch out of a little. In other words, it's like, it's kind of, you got to be kind of a MacGyver. If you go back old school, you got to be able to take a little bit of something that doesn't fit and then make it look awesome. And some of that means being frugal. And I would say, until I met Kurt, I thought I was actually the tightest person that I knew. I thought I was the tightest. As a matter of fact, 15 years ago, one of the references that the Pulpit Search Committee actually asked when I was back in Houston, and they some part of the form, one of my references, these are people that are supposed to love me, one of my references put down, he is tighter than bark on a tree.
That's good.
Now, I thought I was there until I met Kurt McClure, and he is tighter than I am.
A whole new level, right?
He is tighter than I am. Generous with his spirit, but he's, okay, I got a quick question. How much you pay for whatever that half zip?
$12.99.
He knows. The thing is, he knows every dollar amount of what he spent.
I love campus pastors like that, because they're like, okay, how much did that prayer bench cost? That's $4.99.
Right.
So anyway, it's going to be great. Text, what do you do if you want to find out?
Text Wayville 28282.
Yep.
Get all the info you need.
And do it quick, because we got a big announcement party that's probably coming up sooner rather than later. You want to be invited. You don't want to miss that. You don't want to miss it.
Amazing.
Okay.
Awesome, man. Hey, thanks for the updates. I know our people are going to be thrilled and excited, and we got more people who need to jump in and get involved. Right. So, man, I'm so excited for that. Excited for today, too. We're going to talk through some stuff related to what we did this past Sunday. Pastor, you did a great job. I listened back through yesterday, and I was just blown away. You could tell how much thought and research and time. I don't want to know the amount of hours that went into prepping last week's sermon, but diving into gender identity, diving into kind of that transgender debate and talking through what Scripture has to say. I thought you did a fantastic job. So we're going to kind of talk about some things that surround that today, but before we do that, just want to look back. I know there's so much that happens on a Sunday morning. Pastor, for you and also Kurt, from your seat, and I know you have a Connect group that meets on Sundays, and just do a little Sunday recap and look back on some of the things we felt like God did or taught us just yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that was sitting out there because of the questions that came in when we put it out there. So, it was a little bit more anxious about it, and I stayed in my notes a little. I noticed, especially in the first service, stayed in the notes a little bit. It's kind of like you don't want to, you're in some unfamiliar territory in regard. I was most comfortable with, obviously, the Bible parts that we're doing, but even it took me several hours last week just to get the definitions down.
Yeah.
And definitions are important when you're trying to talk, you're trying to be precise in unfamiliar territory. So that was really the extra of last week, but it does go back. It is constantly amazing that how the Bible speaks to these issues that everybody thinks are brand new, and they're not brand new. These things have been around, forever. And we went back again to Genesis chapter 1. But to me, it's interesting when science catches up with the Bible.
That's right.
And you see it, I mentioned it yesterday, you see it all the time. Whether it be an archaeological discovery or whether it be some scientific discovery, and they're like, the Bible's actually talked about that for a long time. So it is cool to see that. But it was it's a little tense because when you start talking about these things like transgender, you're talking about, just for some people, one of their biggest pain points. Even though that's a small percentage of people, it is in some areas growing. Even like the suicide rate of people who have, gender dysphoria is, I think 4% for the general population is like 41%, I believe, or at least an attempt. So you're talking about a pain. And then on top of that, you've got the pain of people who love them that are trying to navigate this with them. It's almost like any prodigal, whatever area that is, but this is one of those areas. And parents, grandparents, this is... as I said yesterday, for some of us, this came on the scene probably in 15, when Bruce Jenner came out as Caitlyn Jenner. At least that was for me. It's like, what, that's the guy that won the decathlete, right? The decathlon, right? So, I tried to, do the balance, not the balance, but try to be real clear on here's what the Bible does say, and try to, our deal with John 1:14 is, we try to do every Sunday is truth and grace, not truth or grace, or not grace or truth. It's both and, which is sometimes I'm a truth guy by personality.
Right.
And so I've got to be careful that it's, we talked about the old saying is truth with no grace is brutality. Mm-hmm. I mean, truth with no grace is brutal. And I can be that. I have been that guy before. And also, but on the other hand, just as dangerous is grace with no truth.
That's right.
And you don't want to do that either. It doesn't help anybody if you don't tell them the truth. And so what we tried to do to navigate yesterday as best we could is to, do both and not get in the weeds. I know I listened to a lot of people, read a lot of people, and I was like, okay, how much do my people in 42 minutes, what do they need in regard to their discipleship journey? How much time do you spend on the definitions that are the cultural moment? How much time do you spend on the principles? Those. So that was really more the wrestle. It was definitely more difficult than the week before with politics. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, actually, in our Connect group yesterday, we kept having the conversation of how do you continue to share the gospel with people that you disagree with?
Right.
Or you mentioned early on in the sermon, don't just say it. It actually matters how you say it. And that's in 1 Peter chapter 3, where out of respect, out of love, words matter.
Yeah.
I mean, you were talking about how much time you spent this past week on definitions, and for the 42 minutes, words matter. We talk about that to our boys all the time.
Yeah.
When you're in conversation with someone, it's not just what you say, but it's the tone that we bring to that. So that was something we dove into yesterday. And just even from the Facebook post after the sermon yesterday, it's a great calling to be a woman, and it's a great calling to be a man.
Right.
Very simple, but it's also in today's conversations of being truth and love.
Yep.
And not just saying, just go do it.
Right.
Just pull your bootstraps up and go, but actually living out our calling on our life.
Well, I think, we tried to hit it's like, how broad do you go as well? And so, do you do gender? Because you got a whole bunch of stuff with whether it be gender roles of men, gender roles of women, transgender. So you're trying to navigate, that whole deal. And part of the cultural crosswinds we are right now is what Kurt just mentioned in regards to it is to try to, in my mind, emasculate the men and take away the beautiful part of the femininity of women. So that's one part. The other part, one part is saying they're just the same. The other part is actually making more, trying, especially more people that take the Bible real seriously. Is typically the fault is not this one. It's the one to take biblical principles and what I would call over application. In other words, an example, we said that the man should be one of the three roles we touched on. There's really five, but one of the three we touched on is provider. And you can see that from Adam. You can see that from Paul telling Timothy, if a man does not provide for his family, he's worse than an unbeliever. You have all of that. But within that, there's a bunch of room. In other words, there's nowhere in there that, and I've heard preachers make this case that, the man should be the primary breadwinner. The woman should not work outside the home, all those things. And I'm like, that's not in the Bible. Now if you want to apply that, that's fine. And that if you want to apply that to your family, that's fine. That's just not, God is not dogmatic in that regard. Some guys might, he does have to provide. He does have to work, all those kind of different things. He does have to work hard, but there's a lot of grace and room in there for what I would either call priesthood of the believer on one side or wisdom on the other side. Because, so again, I think our tribe typically applies biblical principles further than God does. I'm like, you know what? I mean, if God gives some room, we ought to give some room. If God's very specific, and he is on a lot of things, but he's not in some of those areas we looked at yesterday. How do those gender roles flesh out in everyday life? That's where there's not, the Bible is not Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best or Mad Men or whatever. It's not. They've got some faults too. Some of the roles that now we have, some of those roles are more indicative of the Industrial Revolution than they are the Bible. Before, mom and dad shared that work. They were doing a lot of work all with themselves. And then when the Industrial Revolution happened, dad goes off to work from 8 to 5. And so some of those got separated more. So my deal is like, always go back to the Bible. Just go back to the Bible. And then where it's specific, be specific. But don't be more specific than God is specific.
Right.
One of the things I wanted to kind of dive into today a little bit was to take that idea. What we talked about was a really countercultural message and idea surrounding gender, but surrounding so many other things as well, and really talk through downstream a little bit, applying that principle with people that we interact with every day. To use Kurt's language from a minute ago, how do we day by day love people who we disagree with on topics like this, or really any of the topics that we've talked about in this series so far. But how do we apply that in a way that shows both truth and grace, which is the phrase we keep coming back to. So I'm not sure if we can kind of kick that around a little bit and see where it goes. But
yeah, I mean, I would love the dialogue, but that is a journey that sometimes church has done well in general. Sometimes I've done well, and sometimes I've done poorly, and sometimes the church in general has done poorly. But to me, it always is so clear the distinction between the way that Jesus dealt with sinners, which we all are, and he dealt with them in truth and grace. I mean, the woman caught in adultery, neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more. Whether it be, there's so many places, and there's also so many places where the friction came in because of the way that the religious people really despised the sinners. And I understand you call sin sin and John the Baptist and all this. I understand that. But if our ultimate model is Jesus, which it is, our ultimate model is how did he interact with people? As a matter of fact, I think next summer we're going to do about a 12-week series. Just, I don't know if we're going to call it Encounters. That kind of sounds like 1980s, but the way that he, from Zacchaeus to the woman at the well to the, any of the people, the way that he dealt, and it was always that perfect mix, never, ever, ever, ever compromised. Just strong as, but if you look at his strongest arguments were not typically toward people who were broken and downtrodden. It was toward the religious leaders who had no idea about what grace was. So again, the idea of truth, we got to hold strong to it. I mean, we're not, liberalism does nobody any good when it comes to theological liberalism. Never does anybody any good. On the other hand, what I would call, and again, I'm not talking about the fundamentals of the faith, but fundamentalism, which typically is real external focused without a whole lot of heart change, stuff you can measure, that like he chastised, like read Matthew 23 sometime, and it is nothing but just a castigation against any, the outward and no inward. And he summarized it by like your whitewashed tombs.
Yeah.
You look awesome on the outside. I mean, think about that picture. I mean, it is a gravestone that looks awesome, but you're dead on the inside. And that's the part we have to just be careful with, because in our day and time, it's so easy to get caught up on Twitter and all this other stuff and usually make a caricature of people that are not in our, they're not like us. And oftentimes as Christians, we expect the world to act like us, and we demonize, whether it be a political person, or whether, there's just so many things. And it's hard to do that. And it's hard not to do that, excuse me. So truth and grace, humility. I love the phrase. I don't know where I heard it the first time. It's not original with me. It's very hard to look down on somebody as simultaneously as you're looking up at the cross.
It's good.
Because there's that built-in. So we want to basically be people of conviction on one hand, but people of compassion. And those are not enemies. They're friends.
Well, and it's easy to forget what it's like to be lost.
That's right.
We talk about that often.
But also spending time with people that are not like you. It's easy to just have people over that are in your connect group, or you play on the ball team with, or your kids connect well with, or you connect with. We were having that discussion once again in connect group yesterday. When's the last time we had a meal with someone that was not just like us? So the only way you can actually minister to people in your communities is to be with them or know what they're dealing with. And if they trust you, then you can have the hard conversations, and you don't write them off, they don't write you off, and you can just have good dialogue.
Well, not to create a false dichotomy, but one of the things I was struck by last year, we went through John as a church. I'd read John several times, but reading it again was just Jesus so frequently hit, to your point, he interacted with the religious people harshly, and then he interacted with people who would have been, in that day and time, been called sinners with grace and compassion. Now, he offered truth, but he did it with so much grace. And then you turn that question around on yourself, like you said, and say, well, how do I interact with people? Do I interact with them? And what do those look like on a day-to-day basis? It's a big conversation. We can go a lot of different directions with it. And I think one thing I was struck by too, you mentioned in the message, and this may have been a throwaway comment, but I'll throw it out there anyway, is just we talked a lot about the kind of the questions that culture's been asking us. And at some point we've got to kind of turn around and dialogue about some of the questions as believers we ask. And finding the balance there is pretty interesting.
No, for sure. It was a throwaway line, and I don't even know if I did it both services. It was really about it was about the series in general, because and that we almost need to do one that is more, This week will be a little bit more like that. But a lot of the questions were, how do you navigate in this culture, from politics to, the gender questions. We've done one on, Jesus, in the gay community. We've done one, we've tried to tackle all the hard topics, and we've tackled racism several times. We've tackled, abortion. We've tackled, homosexuality, we tackled gender, we tackled politics. I'm pretty sure we tackled all of them.
It's a big one.
We'll see. That's why we go on sabbatical here in a couple weeks. Sounds good. I'm just going to be like the evangelist that comes in, stirs everything up, and then leaves the mess.
Do you want to, as we wrap up today, do you want to mention, talk through maybe this Sunday's message, or do you want to kind of let it ride and say it's a surprise?
I don't have a title yet. I'll probably do it by Facebook Live. I'll do it.
Okay.
It is going to hit about 8 or, there's so many questions that are subsets of the bigger question. Subsets of the bigger question, does the Bible condone slavery? Can you take the Bible literally? What about the supposed contradictions in the Bible? So those are all subsets. I'm not sure what the big one is, but there's a bunch of questions that are underneath that we'll try to tackle either Sunday morning or on the podcast.
Well, I'm very hesitant to speak on behalf of our church, but this is one of those situations where I want to take a second and just say thank you for being willing to put the hard work in, put the prep in, to have that backbone that is so needed often to talk about the difficult topics. And last week was another great example of, I think we're so blessed to have you as a pastor.
I appreciate that, Christian.
Grateful for you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, man.
I think everyone feels the same. I'm speaking for everyone. I'll just say
man,
for me,
I appreciate that very much. Good. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys both for jumping on.
Enjoyed it.
We're going to be back on Thursday. So 2 more days from today when this episode comes out. Having some more fun. We've got a fun episode lined up for Thursday as well.
Right.
And we'll be back then. And then on Sunday, make plans to join us for that Ask Me Anything series, week 6 this Sunday. As always, you're loved and sent.